Debt is one person's liability but another person's asset. It is an open and short fact that no country in the world operates without incurring debt for developmental projects, not even in nations described as sinner climb. Debt itself is not bad if it is judiciously used for the purpose of its addresses. After all, the world acclaimed greatest country or economy, the United States of America, remains the most indebted country on the planet. The US debt status as of today stands at $35 trillion. Much as the US leads the world in the highest indebted nation, developmental projects that are proportional to such debt acquisition are overt and visible across the 50 states of North America continent. In light of this, putting Nigeria's debt obligation into historical perspective and proper context, a broader look at this in retrospect will give a comprehensive understanding of the country's sojourn on debt acquisition. September 30, 1999, 4 months into the current democratic governance that has spanned over the last quarter of a century, Nigeria's external debt servicing was retained at $1.5 billion, while our external debt stood at $28.54 billion. Suffice to say the bulk, if not all of the outstanding debt as of that date were acquired by the military administration. Let's check Nigeria's debt profile from the Obasanjo's administration. Nigeria public debt has risen the most under the immediate past Buhari's administration when compared to previous governments since 1999. Foreign debt has grown 3 times more than the combined figure recorded by the past 3 administrations of Obasanjo, Yar'Adua and Jonathan as foreign debt in 1999. It left $2.11 billion in 2007 after successfully securing a loan write-off by the London and Paris Club of Foreign Creditors. Moving forward, the Yar'Adua and Jonathan government added $1.39 billion to what they met, and the Jonathan government incurred additional $3.8 billion, taking the country's total foreign debt to $7.3 billion when the administration came to an end in 2015. Nigeria's external loan reached $28.57 billion by December 2020, meaning an extra $21.27 billion was accumulated under the Buhari's administration, 3 times the combined amount by the past governments since 1999. What about Nigeria's domestic debt? Well, for the domestic debt, considered relatively less harmful to the value of naira than foreign debt, the figure rose from 795 billion naira in 1999 when the Obasanjo government came to power to 8.8 trillion naira in 2015 when the Buhari's administration assumed office. By December 2020, Nigeria's domestic debt stood at 16.02 trillion naira, twice as much as the combined amount taken by the past 3 governments. At the beginning of the Umaru Yar'Adua Goodluck Jonathan administration, Nigeria's domestic debt stood at 2.17 trillion naira, but jumped to 5.62 trillion at the end of the administration in 2011. The external debt also moved from $2.11 billion to $3.5 billion within the period under review. In effect, the debt stock moved from 2.42 trillion naira to 6.17 trillion naira in 4 years, representing an average of 930 billion borrowing per year. The nation's exchange rate also fell from 116.8 naira per dollar to 156.7 naira per dollar during the period, according to Central Bank of Nigeria. It is important to note that Mr. Jonathan completed his tenure from May 2010 to May 2011 after the death of the late Umaru Musa Yar'Adua. The 12-month period saw an increase in the federal government's debt from 4.94 trillion naira to 6.17 trillion naira. By May 2011, when Dr. Jonathan was elected to serve in fresh term in office, Nigeria's foreign debt was $3.5 billion, but went up to $7.35 billion when he left in 2015. In the same vein, The country's domestic debt climbed from 5.62 trillion naira to 8.8 billion naira. Nigeria's combined debt figure under Mr. Jonathan administration went from 6.17 trillion naira in 2011 to 9.8 trillion naira in 2015. This represents a 3.63 trillion naira increase, or an average of 900 billion naira in loans per year. The country's official exchange rate also stood at 197 per $1 during the period under review. Former President Muhammadu Buhari inherited an 8.8 trillion naira federal government domestic debt in 2015. However, the figure rose to 16.02 trillion naira as of December 2020. Likewise, the nation's exchange rate fell from 197 to $1 in 2015 to 381 at the end of December 2020. Up from $7.35 billion in 2015, Nigeria's external borrowing stood at $28.57 billion as of December 2020. This means that the administration incurred $21.27 billion in foreign loans. Putting together external and domestic borrowing, former President Buhari had borrowed 17.06 trillion as of March 2021, using the 381 naira exchange rate. This represents an average of 2.83 trillion naira per year, according to Budget, a civil tech non-profit organization. Of the 3.42 trillion naira generated as revenue, Nigeria spent 3.34 trillion in debt servicing. Also, 3.3 trillion naira was set aside for debt servicing in the assented 2021 budget, about a quarter of the entire 13.6 trillion naira total expenditure. This trend has been in place since 2016. In 2016, the country spent almost a quarter of its budget to service debt. Of the 6.6 trillion naira budgeted for 2016, the government earmarked 1.5 trillion naira for debt financing. The sum of 1.6 trillion naira was proposed for servicing debt out of the total 7.3 trillion naira budgeted for 2017. In 2018, the figure rose, as 2.2 trillion naira or 24.17% was pegged for debt servicing in the 9.1 trillion naira budget, while in 2019 the government proposed to spend 24% of the 8.9 trillion naira expenditure on debt service. In mid-September, the former President Buhari sought the approval of the Senate to borrow $4 billion and 710 million euro from bilateral and multilateral organizations to fund the deficit in 2021 budget. The president said the loan request was an addendum to the 2018 to 2020 borrowing plan, and that the new borrowing is to meet emerging needs for some critical projects. In July, the National Assembly had approved then President Buhari's request to borrow $8.3 billion and 490 million euro loans contained in the initial 2018 to 2020 borrowing plan. Like the economic analyst and special advisor to Mr. President, Office of the Vice President, Dr. Tope Fasua recently said, Nigeria's loan is already unsustainable because it is taking 95 to 97% of revenue generated. Another opinion is that of Samuel Bamidele, Head of Research and Intelligence at Philip Consulting Limited, who said, although Nigeria's debt remained within the IMF recommended range with respect to GDP, the country faces a challenge when its debt stock is compared to its revenue. He also worried about how the government was using the borrowing funds. Nigeria's debt stock at 33% of GDP is sustainable at that level, but the issue is more around servicing the debt, he said. Debt stock is above 40%. According to the IMF Debt Sustainability Framework, it means that it is no longer sustainable, Mr. Bamidele said. The Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, few days ago corroborated the position alleged to Dr. Fashola and Mr. Samuel by asserting that the country's foreign debt was being serviced with 97% of the country's revenue until the Tinubu's administration came in. Fortunately, the current administration has only succeeded in bringing debt to equity ratio to 68% in just its 1 year in power.